I want to begin my talk this morning with a really silly story, okay? It's about this woman, and she lived all alone, and she was terribly lonely. And so she came up with this idea that she would go and buy a parrot who would talk to her and keep her company. So she goes to the pet store, she buys this parrot, and she brings it home, and she sets up this elaborate cage, and she puts the parrot in the cage, closes the door, and steps away, and she watches and waits. She stares for a long, long time, and the parrot never talks, never says a word. So the woman goes to the pet store the very next day. She tells the owner of the store that this parrot's not talking, and he says, well, you need to buy a ladder. Parrots love to climb ladders. Up and down they go for exercise, you know. So she buys this ladder, and she goes back to her home, and she opens the cage, or the door to the cage, bird cage, and she puts the ladder inside it, closes the door, steps away, and she watches and waits. And the parrot goes up and down for exercise on the ladder, but doesn't talk. The parrot never says a word. And so the woman the very next day goes back to the pet store and saying, oh, the parrot doesn't talk. Want it to keep me company. And so the owner of the pet store says, you need a swing. Parrots love to swing back and forth. It'll calm the parrot, put it in a good mood. So she buys a swing, goes back home, and she opens the door of the bird cage, and she has to move the ladder to the side, and she hangs the swing, and she closes the door. She steps back, and she waits and watches. And the parrot goes up and down the ladder and goes back and forth on the swing, but never says a word, not one word. So the very next day, the woman goes back to the pet store. She tells this pet store owner what's going on. And the owner says, here's what you need. You need a mirror. Because, you know, parrots love to look at themselves in the mirror over and over. So she buys the mirror. And she goes back home, and she opens the door to the bird cage. And she has to, this time, move the ladder back ever so far. And then she rehangs the swing. And then she places in a perfect position a mirror. And then she closes the door, she steps back, and she watches. And the parrot goes up and down the ladder and back and forth in the swing. And wouldn't you know it, the parrot keeps looking at himself again and again in the mirror. This time, the woman returns to the pet store. She's talking to the owner. And this time in a very weak and sad voice, she says, the parrot died. What do you mean the parrot died? What happened? That's terrible. And then the pet owner said, well, just tell me this. Did the parrot ever say anything before it died? Yes, the woman said. The parrot finally said something. Well, what did it say? And the parrot, she said this. Do they sell any food over there? Friends, we have all this stuff, and thank you for laughing, by the way. We have all this stuff. We have ladders, we have swings, and we have mirrors. In the church, it looks a little like this. We have Bibles. These are just a few of my many Bibles. Many of us have many Bibles, and we have them in many different various translations. We have spiritual books. We have journals. We have devotionals. We have, oh yes, meditation and Bible apps. We have yoga mats. We have candles. We have music. We have rituals. We have all these Bible studies and Bible groups and Bible study tools. You name it. We have all this stuff. But maybe the lesson for us this morning, as it relates to our connection, our relationship to God and to each other and all of creation, is that less is more. Say that with me. Less is more. I want to talk today about an important biblical teaching and concept and practice. But I have to warn you, it is so countercultural that it is very difficult to be faithful to. And the concept has to do with a weekly 24-hour Sabbath. Sabbath not as a burden or something that we've got to add to our responsibilities, but Sabbath as delight. You know what the word delight means? I had to look it up. I mean, I knew, but I really wanted to know. It means to enjoy something, to take pleasure in it. And I want to talk a little bit today about what it means to have a weekly 24-hour Sabbath that we enjoy, that we look forward to. Now, over the years as a pastor, and I've been at this a while, I have been very reluctant to preach on Sabbath keeping because I've not been very good at it. You know, I'm intense, I'm driven, I like to stay busy, I'm a doer. And so I've had to learn over time to appreciate what this teaching, this important biblical teaching, has to offer us. And as a gift, and not as a burden or responsibility, I've come to learn over the years that Sabbath as delight can lead to abundant life. This is God's mission for the church. God's will for you and for me and for all of us is well-being. It's abundant life. So say that memory verse with me, if you will. We'll put it on the screen. I came. This is Jesus talking, the Good Shepherd. We just came off of Christmas. Why did Jesus come into the world? Say it with me. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So this Sabbath idea, in the Bible, it's a real big deal. Going all the way back to the first story listed in our Bible in the book of Genesis, and it's the story of creation. God created the heavens and the earth, and it took 7 days, a whole week. Time matters to God. How we spend our time is a holy matter. And it takes God 6 days. For 6 days, God works at it. But on the seventh day, what does God do? Rests. God rests. I imagine God doing something like this. Anybody here, have you ever worked on a project for a long time? Or maybe you built something, or you restored a car, or maybe you worked all day getting your yard manicured, and you look back and you're like, that's pretty darn good, you know? You're sitting there going, hey, I really did a good job edging those sidewalks. I think this is what God did. Just basked in the glow of all that God had created. This is Sabbath as delight. And then comes Moses, who's going to lead the people of God out of captivity. Now get this in your mind. They have been enslaved for hundreds of years, these people. Their whole identity, they're not even seen as being human beings. They're seen as being forced labor. And by the way, there are people in this world living today who people do not really see them. They're considered labor. And out of that story of being led out of slavery into the promised land, God gives to Moses and to the people of God these commandments. And today we call them the 10 Commandments. And I need to remind you, at the center of these 10 Commandments, you'll find this commandment about keeping the Sabbath. And not only is it at the center of the commandments, it is the longest of the 10 Commandments. And I have read in the rabbinical tradition that it is taught that if you can obey this one commandment of keeping the Sabbath, then all other commandments will just flow out of your life. Eugene Peterson says that, no, let me say this before I quote Eugene Peterson. The word Sabbath, just in case you don't know what it means, let me tell you. Sabbath literally means to what? Stop. Anybody have a hard time stopping? Sabbath means to stop, to cease, to desist. Eugene Peterson. The technology of Sabbath, he says, is not complex. We simply select a day of the week and we quit our work. It is not a day when we do anything useful. You hear that? We don't do anything useful on our Sabbath day. And why? What is the theological reason for a Sabbath? The Sabbath reminds us who's in charge. Who's in charge? Are we in charge of our lives, ultimately? No, God is. We learned that, many of us, during the pandemic. We thought we were living into this illusion that we were, kind of in control of our lives. And over we were reminded that ultimately we aren't in control. Only God and God alone is. So it's with that theological idea in mind, Eugene Peterson says, if you don't take a Sabbath, you're doing too much and you're being too much in charge. You've got to quit one day a week and just watch what God is doing when you're not doing anything. Now, when is the last time we did that? When's the last time you and I watched what God is doing when we're not doing anything at all? But again, I want to talk about Sabbath as delight. I'm not here to pound you or to burden you with another responsibility to take on in the church. That's not the point. And I want to bring up this. Depending on the season of life that you and I are in, it's easier to celebrate and to faithfully honor a weekly 24-hour Sabbath. I know some of you out there, I got to walk over here to get to the younger people. Some of you are parenting smaller children when they're older, and so you're super busy. Some of you are on call in your jobs. Some of you have to work on Sundays. And so I'm saying to you, depending on the season that you're in, is how you will practice the Sabbath. But I want to plant a seed. That's my goal. I want to deepen your appreciation for this concept. So what I would say to you that can't take an entire day is maybe take a minute. Maybe take 10 minutes a day or a week or an afternoon. Maybe just start reading about Sabbath and learning about it. And in time, you will deepen your appreciation. I think about Sabbath a lot like I do tithing. I wasn't always a tither, and by tithe I mean you give 10% back to God in and through the church. And we want everyone, by the way, in this church to tithe. But it's a lot like tithing. I didn't always tithe. When I was much, much younger, I wasn't in the rhythm. But I learned to tithe by reading about it, learning what the Bible had to say about it, talking to people that were farther along in that practice and learning from them. And then incrementally over time, I grew into being able to give or tithe 10% of my income. And this is true for Sabbath. I haven't always practiced the Sabbath. I've had to learn about it, read about it, experiment with it over time. And here's the problem with so many gifts that God gives us. God gives us these powerful gifts, but we tend to use them instead of for good and for life-giving reasons, we use them for harm. We do this with the Bible, by the way. People have taken the Bible, which is a gift, it's meant to draw us closer to God and to one another, and people have used it as a weapon. And they've used it to divide us instead of unite us. And this has happened with the Sabbath. And we see this happening in the New Testament. Some religious people, they were called the Pharisees. They were challenging Jesus with his Sabbath practices, causing division and discord because they were focused so much on the legalities and how they were practicing it, and they forgot that Sabbath is to be a delight. It's meant to be enjoyed. And so here's what's happening in Mark's gospel. In other places, you'll see Jesus healing on the Sabbath. But early on in Mark's gospel, the disciples are together, and they're in a wheat field, and they're hungry. So what do you do when you're hungry? They harvest some of the wheat. And these Pharisees, because they have a too legalistic approach to the Sabbath, they challenge Jesus and his disciples, and they say, look what they're doing. Naughty, 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 bad people, because they're abusing, they're breaking the Sabbath. And here's what Jesus says. The Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. We're supposed to delight in Sabbath. Sabbath ought to be a day that you're looking forward to, okay? I like what Peter Scazzaro, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, says about a 24-hour weekly Sabbath. He says, Sabbath is like receiving the gift of a heavy snow day. Every single week. Now, I don't know what a snow day looks like for you, But in my life, and I've had to experiment with this, a snow day looks a little bit like this. First of all, I sleep in. I take what I call a gentle morning, where I just do things in my own time. I'm not looking at the clock, making sure I'm on time and punctual. Sorry, JW, John Wesley. On a Sabbath day, which is like a heavy snow day, I've learned that I'll enjoy it more if I spend part of the day in community. You know, it's more fun with friends. I'm single, so I don't have a family to hang out with, but I might go find one of you or a close friend, and we'll go have lunch or hang out together. I might watch a movie. I will read, because I love to read. It's life-giving. It's delightful for me, but I don't let myself read for my sermon. This is really hard for me. And I don't let myself read things like the book of Leviticus. I'm not like George Lamons that enjoys that, you know. But I will read spiritual things as long as it's enjoyable. Working out. Some of you know that I love to exercise, and I like to exercise in a competitive kind of way, but not on my snow day. On my snow day, I only let myself go for casual walks or a fun bike ride or a relaxing swim. And I've had to work on this. This hasn't come easy for me. So I don't know what a heavy snow day looks like for you, but I want to get you thinking about it. Even if you're in your busiest time ever, you can at least daydream and pray about what a heavy snow day every single week would look like for you. The ancient prophet Isaiah spoke into the hearts of the people of God long before Jesus ever did. He was a major prophet. And he's speaking to these people that are in the church, and they're really busy. I mean, they're going at it, worshiping, they're observing the law, they're reading about and studying the law, they're fasting, and they're hard at it. They've got lots of ladders and swings and mirrors. And this prophet is speaking to them with a challenge. Because what they're doing is they're focusing on the trappings, the piety part, and their connection to God, to one another, and to all of creation is hollow. And so these two verses are really about reminding us the purpose of Sabbath. And I want to read these verses as we close out here. If you refrain, if you'll stop from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you'll call the Sabbath a delight, something to be enjoyed, and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interests, or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall take delight in the Lord. And I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. And get this, if you'll honor the Sabbath, I will feed you, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. When we honor the Sabbath in the way it was intended, like a heavy snow day, something to delight in and enjoy, here's what happens. We wind up doing things like loving our enemies. We start to feed those who are hungry. We start to clothe those that don't have them. We start to welcome, Linda, homeless people into our hearts and into our lives. We start to parent in a more engaged way. We're kinder to our partners. We're just better at relationships. Because what it's really all about is our love and connection to God and to each other. So be it, and so it is. Amen. Now you're in for a treat, so stay right where you are. Instead of just hearing from me, I guess your pastor, about how I experience and live into this biblical concept, I've invited two friends. You'll know them. Peter and Kay Bernheim. Now, as they're getting set up, I'm going to have a conversation with them about Sabbath keeping because they've had such an influence in my life. When did y'all join the church? What year? 1993, long time ago. Not that long, sorry. But they've been here a while. They've been leaders. They've poured into this church, and they've poured into my life. And one of the gifts that you've given me, I'll go ahead and sit down, is that, got to get my notes. You have, in a kind and gracious and patient way, you have taught me through your friendship to lighten up, and not take myself so seriously. And that's been a real gift. And so you have in your bulletin an assessment. This is from Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And it's just a way to kind of, self-monitor, engage where you are in this biblical idea of Sabbath delight. So I would encourage you this afternoon or this week to participate in the assessment and see where you land. Kay and I are not just friends, we're gym partners at Portside Fitness, so we have a little bit of a competitive relationship. So I'm just wondering, what was your score?
Well, Claire, if I'm perfectly honest with myself, my score is probably pretty low or pretty average. But I approached it as I did one of our workouts at the gym, and often we're asked to keep score. And I'm really not much of a scorekeeper unless we're playing cards with our family. But often we're asked to keep up with our score, and it's how long it takes you to do all these exercises or how many rounds you can get in a certain amount of time. Some people keep a board, and they keep up with their score very diligently.
I don't know who would do that.
Some of us just want to give it our all and get through the workout, and so the score that we give ourselves at the end of that is a big old smiley face.
Aww.
So I gave myself a smiley face on this because it's something that that I have to work towards. When I grew up as the daughter of a Methodist minister, and Sundays were anything but restful for us.
Yeah.
And then through the season of raising our children, the same. But as we've gotten older, we've kind of gotten into a rhythm, and I may not consciously prepare for the Sabbath the day before all the time, but we've kind of evolved into a rhythm.
Yeah, and I'm not having them up here because they think they're the experts, by the way. They're living into this idea just like the rest of us. So thank you, Kay, for that. And something I admire about you is that you have a high value for friends and family. And because of that, you prioritize your life around those values and spending time with those people, and you have no problem saying the word no. Sometimes she'll tell me no. Believe that?
I tried today, but it didn't work.
I'm just curious, how do you prioritize, you're discerning. And so how do you decide what to say yes to and what you say no to?
Well, there was a time in my life where I said yes to most everything I was asked to do, but I found myself not enjoying those things and complaining a lot and not feeling like I was putting my best self forward. So I just started looking at the things as, is it something that I enjoy? Is it something that I'm going to be able to put my whole self into? And so if I say yes, you've got me, and I'm going to put my whole self into it. But I will say no if I...
Sure, and I like what you're saying there, because what leads to burnout is, what helps, the antidote to burnout is not a vacation or rest. It's wholeheartedness. So I think we need to think about, you got one life to live, and you've got to know where to show up in this life. And so I think that idea of where am I most wholehearted is important. I'm going to pick on Ruth Bishop. I have to share this story. So when I first came to the church, which was a while ago now, Ruth was complaining. She's a STAR student, and STAR church member, and she was complaining about writing letters to the homebound, or cards. She's like, I got to confess, I don't like doing this. It's just a chore. And I said, well, stop. And she's like, you got to be kidding me. How can I stop? I said, don't do what isn't life-giving for you, okay? Where are you wholehearted? Very important. Okay, good answers there. So, Peter, did you score yourself on the assessment?
Yes, I did.
And?
Somewhere in the mid-30s.
Okay.
Now, this is a 50-point scale, people.
Yeah, and I was in the mid-30s too. So
if you put that on a 100-point scale, that's maybe not a passing grade.
Yeah. Yeah, hold your mic up.
I scored in the mid-30s, and if you put this on a 100-point scale, this is probably not a passing grade or barely. The point is not where one score is, it's where the score is going to be tomorrow or next week or next year.
Yeah.
And I would say if I took that quiz 20 years ago, I wouldn't tell you what my score was.
So tell us about that. Tell us more.
Claire mentioned seasons of life, and there have been times in our lives together where we look back and don't know how we did what we did, which was just survive one day at a time, 1 week at a time, one school session at a time, one call week at a time, one holiday at a time. And we're at a very different point in our lives now where we have the luxury of time. And what we have lacked in the past and somewhat now is intentionality, being able to plan about Sabbath. And this whole exercise has been a seed for me to think about how we have practiced Sabbath and how we will practice Sabbath in the future.
And I just saw Kay roll her eyes. Just kidding. You did kind of. Intentionality. If I've planted a seed, it's that we would all be more intentional. If you're a busy parent, you can only spend an afternoon, but we can all be more intentional about how we spend time with God. So I would ask y'all, how do you experience Sabbath as a couple?
That's a tough question, and I thought about it this week, and I still don't have a good answer, so don't feel bad if you don't have a good answer either. I think whenever we stop, which is the meaning of Sabbath, and pay attention to our relationships with God and with each other, and that could be something as simple as a text, pancake breakfast on a Saturday morning, heated card game in the evening, Zoom call every Sunday. However that is, we stop and think about relationships and ask God, how can there be more of you in this and less of me? And I think that's a way of practicing Sabbath. Mm-hmm. Or it could be a good beach game too.
Yeah, and a little friendly competition's okay. and I want you to hear the word play. You know, that it's delight. It's something that you really enjoy. What would be your goal for our church for 2024?
I'll give everybody the same goal I'll have. I'm going to see where I'm doing a good job at practicing Sabbath during the week and see how I can intentionally form that into something more meaningful in the future. I think the key to preventing burnout is to be renewed, and the only way to be renewed is to lean into God.
Great. And I mentioned this earlier, but Sabbath is better when it's shared.
At least for me. I grew up in a big family, and doing this alone just doesn't make sense.
Give them a hand. They did a great job.